You know, when you suggested this deep dive, I knew it'd be a heavy one.
Yeah,
Incels.
yeah,
It's a lot.
it is.
We've got research articles, even some excerpts from forums to try to give us a glimpse into that world. Are you
Yeah,
ready to go deep?
absolutely. And I think the best place to start is with the term itself.
Okay.
Incel, short for involuntary celibate.
Right.
It gets thrown around a lot these days, but the origin story might surprise you.
Oh, I live for a good origin story. Lay it on me.
Okay, so rewind to 1997.
Okay.
The internet's still this new frontier, and a queer Canadian student named Alana starts a website.
Hold up. Are you saying the incel movement, notorious for its misogyny, was started by a woman? And a queer woman, no less.
Yet you heard that right. The
Wow.
website was called Alana's Involuntary Celibacy Project,
Okay.
meant to be a supportive space for anyone feeling sexually isolated. She even used the term incel at the time.
Which makes a lot more sense than where it ended up. So when
Yeah.
did things take a turn?
Well, by 1999, the spelling shifted to incel.
Okay.
And as the internet grew, so did the communities using the term.
Right.
Forums
Yeah.
like 4chan and Reddit, especially the infamous Incels subreddit,
Yeah.
became breeding grounds for increasingly extreme views.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen before, right? A group starts with a good idea, like finding support for a difficult experience. But as more people join, especially on less moderated platforms, things can spiral.
Exactly. And the incel community, which was initially quite diverse in gender and sexual orientation, became increasingly male-dominated. And the focus shifted away from support to blaming women for their lack of sexual fulfillment.
Which ultimately led to those subreddits getting shut down, didn't it?
Right. Reddit banned Incels in 2017 and then lower brain cells in 2019 because of the increasingly violent and toxic content.
Right.
It violated their policies against inciting violence.
Of course.
This pushed some groups further underground to less moderated platforms and even the dark web.
So to really understand the incel ideology today, we need to get into their central philosophy. The black pill. From what I've gathered, it's not exactly a cheerful outlook.
To say the least,
Yeah.
the black pill is basically a fatalistic worldview.
Okay.
Imagine believing your chances of finding love are predetermined by things like your appearance and social status, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to change it. That's the black pill.
The self-improvement is completely off the table in their mind.
Completely. And that's one reason this ideology is so dangerous, because if you're convinced your life is predetermined, that you're destined to be alone, it can lead to a very dark place.
Right.
We're talking resentment, hopelessness, and in some cases, even violence.
Which brings us to Elliot Rodger, a name that's become tragically linked to the darkest side of the incel community.
Right.
How did someone like him, who committed such a horrific act, become a symbol for this group?
It's unsettling, to say the least. For those who might not know, Roger was the perpetrator of the 2014 Isla Vista killings in California. He killed 6 people and injured 14 others before taking his own life.
Yeah.
He identified as an incel and left behind a manifesto and videos detailing his hatred toward women for rejecting him.
So his actions, fueled by this twisted ideology, ended up resonating with a segment of this community.
Right.
It's a chilling example of online hatred spilling over into real-world violence.
And unfortunately, Roger's case isn't an isolated one.
Right.
The 2018 Toronto van attack, where Alec Manassian killed 10 people and injured 16 others, was also linked to incel ideology.
Oh, right, yeah.
Manassian had praised Roger online and claimed the incel rebellion had begun.
And that rebellion rhetoric continues.
Right.
They use terms like going ER, which is basically code for committing acts of violence against women.
Yes, and then there's the disturbing concept of a beta uprising.
Right.
Have you come across that term in your research?
I have, but I'm not entirely clear on what it means.
Essentially, it describes a violent uprising by incels against what they perceive as a system designed to keep them sexually deprived. It's a dangerous fantasy fueled by misogyny and a sense of entitlement to women's bodies.
Right.
They believe they are owed sex and companionship.
It's clear that we can't just dismiss incels as a fringe group of disgruntled men.
No.
Their ideology, while rooted in a sense of isolation and frustration, can have very real and terrifying consequences.
Absolutely.
But one thing I'm struggling with is how much of what they claim about themselves and women is actually true.
Right.
For example, they often use terms like biological determinism and evolutionary psychology to justify their views.
Yeah.
Can you explain those concepts and how incels are misusing them?
Absolutely. First, let's define those terms.
Okay.
Biological determinism is the idea that our biology dictates our destiny. that our genes determine our behavior and life outcomes.
Okay.
Evolutionary psychology attempts to explain human behavior through the lens of evolution, how certain traits might have helped our ancestors survive and reproduce.
So how are these concepts twisted by incels to fit their worldview?
That's what we'll delve into next.
Okay, so we've got these complex scientific ideas,
Right.
biological determinism and evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
And it sounds like incels are using them to justify some pretty harmful beliefs.
Exactly. They'll latch onto these concepts, often twisting them to fit their narrative. For instance, they might cherry-pick studies on biological determinism to argue that their genes doom them to be undesirable to women.
But human attraction is so much more than just genetics, right?
Absolutely. It's about personality, chemistry,
Yeah.
shared values, life experiences.
Right.
Reducing it all down to genetics is a gross oversimplification.
Right.
And they do the same thing with evolutionary psychology. They'll use it to claim that women are biologically hardwired to be attracted to only the most dominant men,
Right.
the alpha males, leaving the so-called beta males out in the cold.
So are they saying women lack free will when it comes to choosing a partner? As if women aren't attracted to intelligence, kindness, or a sense of humor?
Precisely, they ignore the nuances of human attraction in relationships.
Right.
It's like they took one intro to psychology course and decided they had it all figured out.
Yeah.
And speaking of oversimplification, they also have this whole system of labels, right?
Right.
Stacy's, Chad's, Becky's. It's like they're trapped in a high school movie.
Yeah, it's like a bad high school movie where the only plot line revolves around who can get the girl.
Right.
But it's more than just immature, isn't it? These labels reduce real people to stereotypes.
Exactly. It's dehumanizing. In their worldview, women aren't individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and desires,
Yeah.
but just trophies to be won in some twisted game they've created.
Right.
Stacy's are the unattainable, attractive women. Chad's are the hyper-masculine men who effortlessly get them, and Becky's fall somewhere in between.
So in their minds, a woman's worth is solely determined by her perceived attractiveness and her relationship with man.
It's a very distorted and harmful way of viewing women.
Right.
And this brings up a crucial point.
Okay.
While it's easy to get caught up in the more shocking aspects of incel ideology,
Right.
the violence, the misogyny,
Right.
it's important to remember that these beliefs are often rooted in a deep sense of pain and frustration.
Okay, let's talk about that, because on the one hand, we have this incredibly harmful rhetoric with some members even advocating for violence against women, but then you're saying there's another side to this that we need to have some empathy for where these feelings are coming from.
I think it's important to understand the broader context.
Mm.
It's not about excusing their behavior, but many of these individuals are struggling with social isolation, loneliness, feelings of inadequacy, and mental health challenges.
Right.
They're often young men who feel lost and disenfranchised, and the incel community, as toxic as it is, offers a warped sense of belonging and validation.
So it's like they've stumbled into this online echo chamber where their insecurities and frustrations are amplified instead of being challenged or addressed in a healthy way.
It's a dangerous cycle, and that's where the real danger lies. Even for those who don't engage in physical violence, their words, their online posts can contribute to a culture of fear and misogyny, making women feel unsafe.
So while not all incels are violent, their ideology itself can be incredibly damaging. It's important to make that distinction, but how do we address this? How do we reach these individuals and help them break free from that toxic echo chamber?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something researchers, mental health professionals, and even policymakers are grappling with.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is figuring out how to talk about incels.
You mean how the media portrays them? Because I've definitely seen some pretty sensationalized headlines that seem to focus more on the shock value than actual understanding.
Right, it's a tough balance. We need to raise awareness about a dangerous phenomenon without giving it more attention, potentially even inadvertently glamorizing it to vulnerable individuals.
It's like a tightrope walk. How do we shed light on the issue without making it worse? It seems like acknowledging the humanity of these individuals, even while condemning their ideology, is crucial.
It is, and that includes recognizing the diversity within the incel community. Not everyone who identifies with that label holds the same beliefs or poses the same level of risk.
So we need to be careful about making generalizations. It's not a monolithic group.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to address the underlying societal issues that contribute to these feelings of isolation, resentment, and inadequacy. These are complex issues that extend far beyond any one online community.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What are some of those root causes and how can we address them? So we've talked about the dangers of the incel ideology and how online echo chambers can amplify those harmful beliefs. But what about the root causes? What are some of the societal factors that contribute to this sense of isolation and resentment, and how do we address them?
Well, I think one crucial area is masculinity. We need to have more open and honest conversations about what it means to be a man in today's world.
You're talking about challenging those traditional and often very rigid notions of masculinity. The idea that men have to be strong, dominant, and sexually successful in order to be considered real men.
Exactly, because those expectations can be incredibly damaging, especially for young men who feel they don't measure up or who don't fit neatly into those narrow boxes.
And it's ironic, isn't it? Because the very ideology that incels cling to, this idea of male entitlement, ends up isolating them further. It prevents them from forming healthy relationships based on mutual respect and
Okay,
understanding.
it's a self-defeating cycle. And beyond challenging these harmful norms, we also need to provide young men with healthier alternatives, positive role models, supportive communities, and opportunities to connect with their emotions and build genuine self-esteem.
So it's about creating spaces where vulnerability isn't seen as weakness and where seeking help is encouraged, not stigmatized.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another crucial aspect, the importance of addressing the broader issue of social isolation. We live in an increasingly digital world where it's easier than ever to feel disconnected from real human connection.
And while online communities can provide a sense of belonging, we've also seen how those spaces can be breeding grounds for extremism and harmful ideologies, especially if they're not balanced with real-world interactions and support systems.
It's all about finding a healthy balance, and we need to be having these conversations early on, teaching young people how to navigate the online world safely and responsibly, how to think critically about the information they're consuming, and how to build meaningful relationships, both online and offline.
So it's not just about monitoring their screen time, but also about equipping them with the tools they need to be discerning consumers of information and responsible digital citizens.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the mental health crisis facing young people today. We need to make mental health resources more accessible, affordable, and stigma-free.
Because seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. It's about taking care of yourself and acknowledging that everyone needs support sometimes.
Precisely. And it's not just about providing resources, but also about creating a culture where talking about mental health is normalized and encouraged.
Yeah.
We need to create a world where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength and self-awareness, not something to be ashamed of.
So it sounds like addressing the incel phenomenon requires a multifaceted approach, one that tackles harmful societal norms, promotes mental well-being, and encourages healthy relationships in communities both online and offline.
Absolutely. It's about creating a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are, and that's a goal worth striving for.
It is, and it brings us back to that initial point about the evolution of the term incel. It started with a genuine desire for connection, for understanding, for support. Somewhere along the way, that message got lost, distorted by anger, resentment, and a dangerous ideology.
And it's a stark reminder of how important it is to approach even the most challenging issues with nuanced empathy and a willingness to understand the underlying factors at play.
Because beneath every ideology, every label, every online persona, there's a human being with their own story, their own struggles, and their own capacity for change.
Beautifully put, and that I think is a powerful message to end on. We can't afford to simplify these issues or to lose sight of our shared humanity, even when confronting difficult and uncomfortable truths.
You know, when we started this deep dive, I knew it would be a tough one, but you've shed light on so many aspects of this issue, and I think our listeners will come away with a much deeper understanding of the incel phenomenon.
It's been my pleasure. It's through these difficult conversations that we can hopefully start to dismantle harmful ideologies and build a more compassionate and equitable world.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we'll leave you with this. While the incel subculture might seem like a fringe group, their struggles reflect a broader societal need, the need for connection, belonging, and a sense of purpose in an increasingly complex world. How can we as individuals and as a society create spaces where those needs are met in healthy and constructive ways? That's something worth reflecting on.